Hi, I want to talk today about a little Kazuo Ishiguro. Ishiguro is a Nobel Prize winning author, right? One of our living authors. And as I mentioned before with Coatsy, remember Nobel Prizes are given for lifetime work, not for a single work. Currently, I am reading through Clara and the Sun, which is the first novel that he has published since receiving the Nobel Prize. Ishiguro is interesting. You probably weren't expecting, when you took British Lit, to find an author with a Japanese name. He was, of course, born in Japan, if you read the notes in our textbook, but raised in Great Britain. And thus we have him. And, of course, he's obviously a highly successful writer in the English language, as I said, a Nobel Prize. Probably know him best for Remains of the Day, just because that got made into a movie, right? People kind of know that one. Won the Booker Prize as well. Ishiguro's writing, and particularly in the village, A Village After Dark, okay, in that short story that we have. On the one hand, to me, it's a very, very clean style, right? It's a very, very clean style. On the other hand, in A Village After Dark, he creates a very dream-like environment. As you read this story, right, the kind of anti-rationalism creeps up. I mean, it seems normal, seems all right, and then it's like not, right? It's like totally bizarre. Or let's just say highly unlikely, right? So you have a narrator, the main character, Fletcher, who is returning to, shall we say, the scene of his great triumphs. We don't really know what they were. I always kind of think, when I think of this story, I think of like the hippie leaders of the 60s and 70s who were forgotten, right? Once the war was over and time had passed and the issues of Vietnam and those other things kind of disappeared, went away with time, or just simply changed, and new people came forward. The old leaders disappeared. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Chicago 7. There was a movie not too long ago about that, but one of the main characters is a character named Abby Hoffman. By the way, since of course my last name is Hoffman, one of the things I endured as a young child growing up in the late 60s, early 70s was being called Abby Hoffman. I had no idea who he was. My parents told me he was a horrible person. I didn't quite know why. Abby Hoffman committed suicide, ultimately, right? Never found his place, right? A lot of those guys who were in those big, high profile positions, that was the peak of their life. And I can't help but think of that when I look at this main character, Fletcher. He's coming back. He's no longer in power. The old people remember him. There's people kind of like who sort of they don't really want to deal with him, right? Those are the older people. The young people think of him quite different than how he really is, right? He's a name to them. He's maybe famous in a certain way, and maybe he offers them a vision, an idealized view that the older people don't have. They're not idealistic about it because they lived through it and they kind of know what's what. But notice how quickly things turn for Fletcher. For example, one of the first things we see is how jealous he is of status. When somebody mentions a guy named David Magus, who was apparently one of his peers or compatriots, he denounces him as being relatively unimportant. Oh, you mustn't think that he was one of the important ones. He really wasn't, right? There's something very small about that, right? Very small indeed. Notice how he doesn't really recognize his own home until he's in it. Never recognizes his old lover. Even as she talks to him and basically, tells him what a jerk off he is, he doesn't even remember her. Why? This is what I mean by kind of like a dreamscape. Does that happen in your real life? I mean, it doesn't happen to me, right? I kind of know where I am, and I certainly know who I'm speaking with. And if I were to speak with somebody from my dark past, I probably would remember her too, right? Probably. But he doesn't, right? He doesn't. And so there's a great deal of uncertainty. On the one hand, there seems purpose. He has some reason for coming back. But on the other hand, if he was expecting a hero's welcome, he's not getting it, right? And so there's this disruption of our expectations, his expectations and our expectations as readers. If you read the footnote, not the footnotes, but the liner notes, right, the prefatory material that Greenblatt and editors have put together, you see again references to some of our folks like Samuel Beckett, right, Waiting for Godot, or Kafka, who I also have mentioned already before in talking about Coetzee. There is a Kafkaesque quality, right, to the writing. In other words, again, things don't make sense, and yet that's exactly how they're supposed to be, right? It's very disturbing, very upsetting. And as in Beckett, for instance, Waiting for Godot, nothing happens twice. In this story, again, nothing really happens. Right? And I don't want to give away the ending, except there's not a lot to give away, because it's all kind of something that maybe we're still waiting for. He's not waiting for Godot, but what is he waiting for? Right? Waiting for a bus. Magic school bus, I don't know. Right? Take him somewhere. He runs into one guy who talks to him extensively, who's a schoolmate that he bullied, right? That Fletcher had bullied. That Fletcher was the bad guy. He was the bully in the schoolyard. And this other character, Roger, was the victim. But he sounds like he kind of, how should I put it? Well, he sounds conflicted, Roger. On the one hand, he's like proud that he overcame that. In fact, he even wants to show Fletcher how great he became. And on the other hand, he's still pretty not happy with him about all that. There's the bullyard ethos, the schoolyard ethos that says the bully is just making you tougher for life, toughened you up. I did you a favor, right? I don't know if you've heard people defend bullying like that, which is really a load of what. But that's kind of what they say, right? Oh, I just make you tough. You got to thank me, right? No. And so there's no comfort in that either for Fletcher. And while Roger doesn't, take a 2x4 to his head, on the other hand, he doesn't give him the absolution either, as he shouldn't. But it's even more difficult than that, because it isn't total blame either, because he kind of half buys into that been toughed up. If that's a phrase. Been toughened up. He kind of buys into the victimization. And then there's the young woman who, almost like against all laws of logic and, in my case, personal experience, is waiting for him out in the street even after he's been in his old home for hours. And then he wants to follow her, and she is leading, and he can't keep up, right? That's a very dreamlike quality to me anyway, right? That kind of frustration aspect. There she is, and you're following her, and the distance is increasing. I've asked you to write in the discussion threads about the dream-like qualities, right? Keats, for example, as we know, we talked about Keats and the dreamlike quality that we see in his odes, the 5 great odes that we studied. And in all of them, to one extent or another, is ambiguity, a lack of certainty. And in some of them, quite overtly dreamlike states, like an ode to Psyche or ode to a nightingale, and ode to indolence. The other two, of course, it's a little bit more implied, but in all of the cases, there's a lack of certainty. And that's what's coming here with Ishiguro in A Village After Dark. There's a lack of certainty. And yet our main character, Fletcher, seems almost rejuvenated at the end. But are we buying into it? Are you buying into it? Let me just kind of poke just a little bit at the end here, okay? You don't mind my jumping ahead, right? Closing sentences. I mean, I'm usually not in favor of jumping ahead to closing. I'm not one of those readers who reads the end of the book and then decides, yeah, I want to go ahead and read it. But since I'm assuming everybody's read this really brief short story, I mean, how many pages is it? Not that long, right? He says, I thought of the reception awaiting me at my journey's end, of the adoring faces of the young people, and felt the stirrings of optimism somewhere deep inside me. Is this a delusion? I mean, is this him fooling himself? Will there be this grand reception? Maybe not from his compatriots, not from people of his same age group who, quite frankly, are a little tired of his act and really don't want to have anything to do with it. But maybe like a second run through with a younger group, or a Tony Bennett, right, kind of thing. You get a second career going with a whole bunch of people who think you're cool, after all the people in the middle didn't think you were cool, right? The first people thought you were cool, then there's like a long generation that won't touch you, and then all of a sudden you're cool again, right? Tony Bennett's career. Well, is that what's happening here with Fletcher, right? Maybe, maybe not. We don't know. That's the thing. We just don't know.